everyone, welcome. This is our second in a series of conversations with folks who have been in my quilt making class. Today, we are joined by, in order of when they'll be sharing with us, Aimee, Barbara, Eleanor, Silvia, Karen, who's fixing an audio issue as we speak, and Sarah. I'm over the moon excited to have them share with you. Keep in mind, both so that you're not intimidated if you're thinking of signing up, that they have been in class with me for 9 months now, learning incredible things, getting work done, but also class is not complete. They're going to be working with me through December. And students in this quilt making class are going to then transition to being alumni. So they will continue to have access to my Mighty Network where we gather. They're going to continue to meet with me twice a month in our large group sessions, our co-working sessions where we get together and sew and talk and just get caught up with the world. And they will continue to be able to use that posting on the Mighty Network to update something that we call our virtual studio so that we can let people know what we're up to. And they're going to continue to have access to this incredible community of makers that we've built. In our first Zoom, which the recording is on YouTube, so you can catch up with that anytime you'd like, folks were talking a lot about the community of class and how that's one of the most wonderful aspects of it, getting to have accountability and meeting times, and then getting to have one-on-one conversations with classmates and getting to be inspired by the way that other people are processing each module in the class is just truly exciting. I remember when I graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, I suddenly didn't have those peers. And because it was a very international school, all of us got spread to the wind. And so we were not any longer physically in Chicago, and we didn't have those support systems to keep up with each other and get together on our own or have critiques or group sharing. And that's one of the reasons why I thought this would be such a wonderful tool for people, is that you can continue to meet on Zoom together after class and have peers who are on a similar creative journey. So our path that we are going to be on today is that each person is going to share for 8 to 15 minutes. We're not going to be too strict about it. And they're going to be sharing just a little nugget of their experience in class. They might be sharing about just one quilt and the story of it. They might be sharing about one module that meant a lot to them. They might share quite a bit about what they were up to before they joined the quilt making class and why the class called to them, and that difference of before and after. We were just talking before about how they've been trimming their presentations and trimming and how it's impossible to fully transmit 9 months of exciting learning and community building and sewing in a 10-minute presentation. So you're not going to get the full scope, but I think you're going to get an incredible taste of what we've been up to. And so here we've got Karen. Karen, if you want to just say hi real quick to confirm that we can hear you, that would be so amazing.
I have to say, oh my God.
Yes, we can hear you.
I have had the worst technology weekend. My phone broke and
Oh,
it's,
we've got
yeah.
you. We've got you.
All right. I just need to take a breath before I go through this. Thank God I'm towards the end. So thank you.
Yeah. And so you might see as we are working, hopefully those of you who are joining us are doing a little bit of sewing. It's amazing to see we've got 43 people in the Zoom already. So you might be sewing. As we are presenting, you're very, very welcome to share in the chat. So if you see something that you like or that's exciting, put even just a little heart emoji in there, or you can also type in a question and I'll try to make note of that so that once we've had all 6 people present, we can get to your questions. Any kind of compliments, questions, insights are very welcome. You're welcome to ask questions about each artist's unique point of view or the work that they've been making. And you are also welcome to ask questions about quilt making class itself. So all of those are available. And we are, I think, going to take it away. I'm going to be doing some sewing, and this is my niece Penelope, who you might see in the background. She's a pug, and she's like my assistant teacher when she's visiting me. So here we go. Aimee, the floor is yours.
All right, I'm just gonna share my screen. Let's see. Okay, it always does this. Let's see if I can get it to come down so it will stop so I can actually share the video. It does this thing every time. So I'm not able to get to the button that actually does starts the presentation because there's the block at the top. Is there a way to get rid of
the slideshow button?
Yeah, I can't click it because it's covered by the black
bar.
The
whole window. You can move the whole window down.
Ah, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
I did not do that when I tested.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there we go.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Aimee Walker, and I'm sharing a presentation from Heidi Parkes' quilt making class. The first few slides, I really want to go pretty quickly so I can just to give a little bit of a background information about me. So I have a BFA with a concentration fibers where I primarily created three-dimensional sculptures that were woven or felted. In COVID, I discovered sewing and quilting, though it took me a while to call myself a quilter. The quilt on the left is the first full-size quilt that I did. I gave it to my husband for Christmas in 21. So that's when I finally decided, okay, I'm actually a quilter. I made this quilt without just kind of on my own, trying to figure it out, machine pieced, hand quilted and hand tied. But I also was starting to take classes with Zach Foster, Maggie Muth, Amanda Nadig, and of course, Heidi Parkes to learn a lot of techniques and skills with this new endeavor. But I was trying a lot of different things and felt a little unfocused. And so one of the things that I was really wishing for was the time and the space to really focus on my quilt making, to ask some questions for myself personally about what that was going to look like. So the class was exactly what I needed. It was just what I was looking for. And these were the goals that I had when I started the class. And the biggest goal is I wanted to understand what I wanted to make, why I wanted to make it. I just wanted more clarity. I wanted to have a chance to really explore things that were interesting to me and figure out what my art practice and what my quilts were going to look like. The very first module was about aesthetics. These are all photos that I've taken over the years. And as I look through my photos, that color was very important, color combinations, complementary colors, analogous colors, also patterns, including tons of bridges. I feel like every time I drive across the bridge, unless I take a photograph, I'm not driving the car at that moment, somebody else is. But and bridges are really important to me. I love bridges. I feel like there's something about the space and the pattern, the sound that it makes as you drive across. That feeling of being inside something, but also there's still so much space around you, and the feeling of going through something. So the second module was about conceptual interests. And though the aesthetics felt like such a happy place for me to be in, conceptual interests felt a little bit more challenging. And the question I was asking myself is color enough to be a conceptual interest? And with like Heidi and other artists' permission, I started to do a deep dive into color. I've read books. I have done a lot of web research into different artists and how they've used color in terms of expressing feelings and emotions. And after this deep dive, I decided that I wanted to create my a series of small studies of color studies, which was also one of the modules was about doing a series or a study. And so the first one I did was one of the things, the goal was like, I want to do them quickly. I wanted to learn what was interesting to me about color. I wanted to try out some different color palettes. I just kind of wanted to see what stuck, what made sense for me personally. When I did blue, and I guess some of the things is sometimes I get asked, like, how do I figure out what colors I'm using? So blue was a late night drive where the sky was like a deep navy. The street lights were giving off this plum glow. I was riding behind a truck that had lime green logos and there were red tail lights. And I thought, I want to try these colors together in a quilt. And this piece particularly, I'm hand piecing, hand appliquing, hand quilting, and doing some experimenting with embroidery. And then that quilt led to the red, because I was like, the most interested part to me was the way the red and the plum really worked together. So the second quilt was really about embracing those colors and really playing more into that. So each one I'm thinking about also not just the colors, but how the threads kind of affect the quilting, the quilt lines, thread choices, the density affects the composition. Yellow was one of kind of a turning point for me. One of the big aha moments was that I wanted to was the how much I love complicated hand piecing. And that was the thing that became, that was what I wanted to focus on. Is I love the idea of the puzzle of it, but also the idea of like pushing my skills, how I can make different fabrics come together no matter what their shape is. I also realized in this piece that there was something really interesting to me when there's like this moment of really dense hand piecing, kind of surrounded by these larger pieces of fabric, that and the quilt lines really started to make me feel like that there was this movement through the quilt. And I felt like that had there was something there that I wanted to keep exploring. Pink was, I was continuing to think about how the quilt lines were affecting things, how I could piece things, how I could piece, do the hand piecing in ways that really kind of push the composition more. But when I was done with it, what I was really struck by is I really wanted to do a green piece, sort of the opposite. Instead of pink with green, I wanted to do a green piece with moments of pink in it. So this is green, and this so far has been my most pivotal piece that I've done for class. This has answered a lot of questions for me, which was really exciting. There's a lot of changes. So the other pieces were relatively small quilts. This is bigger than those, like it's probably almost twice as big as the blue quilt. And so though still not a large quilt, it was bigger. It also was more expansive.
Would you say that the blue quilt was around 18 inches square, like a foot and a half?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's wonderful scale that we
Yes, I had to look at it behind me.
Amazing.
Yeah, so like, you know, if you can see me, because it's like this big, I don't know. And then, so this is about twice that, though very landscape. It's not a square, which the blue one is more of a square. One of the things, so it's larger. It's also it's a more expansive in terms of palette. There's a lot more different colors in this piece than in the other ones. And also many more different fabrics, both texturally, like they're made of different things. And also they were all more and more solids. Like I realized that really solids was what was important to me. The hand piecing was still, the complicated hand piecing was still there, but I felt it was really interesting how it ended up being balanced by these larger pieces. And I think all that together kind of started to create this feeling of depth. And as I looked at this, I was feeling like, oh, this feels very landscapey to me. Is this what I'm trying to do? And as I look back through the other pieces, I'm like, oh, I do think I'm sort of trying to do that even without really realizing. Obviously not a landscape that I'm actually seeing, but definitely like memories of a landscape, feelings of a landscape, that feeling of being in something and going through. The other thing that really was interesting to me was how slow this was. The other quilts were fairly quick. This one was a much slower process. And I feel like overall, this quilt has a very serene feeling. And I think that really matched with the pace of me sewing it, is that I realized that that's how I made it. And that's how I felt when I made it. And I feel like it comes across. So then I did this and I was like, oh, I had all these yeses. I had all these things where like, this is what's working for me. It was really exciting, but I'm like, okay, so what's next? And my first thought was like, even though this is bigger than the others, it's still relatively a small quilt. And I'm like, I want to make a bigger quilt. Can I take the things that I've learned in this quilt and make it larger without diluting what was important to me about this quilt? And that was so, okay. And so this is what's in process now. So it is bigger. It's over 40 inches wide and over 30 inches tall. And I don't know how big it's going to be, but it is bigger. Unlike the serenity in some ways of the green quilt, this one started with the purple curved parts that's near the top middle. And then I started adding the orange and the yellow. And when I looked at it, I was like, oh, I was in the middle of summer vacation with my family. And I was like, this is summer. This is the joy and the brightness of summer. This is sherbet ice cream, which is where the working title is coming from. It was like this pure, joyful quilt at that point. And then as I continued to create it and make it, these other darker tones, these deeper, darker combinations started happening. And I was like, right. And just like in life, that there's these lighter moments and darker moments, this quilt is going to have that too. And so it's going to sort of encompass the whole thing. And my hope is that as it goes in this quilt, that those groupings of colors will move back and forth with each other, and so it's a way for your eye to kind of move through the quilt. And then basically I want to end with what I've learned in the class. So color is the most important thing for me. That color is memory. It's a feeling, it's emotion and expression. It's where I start. I start by putting a couple of pieces of fabric together that day, and it's how I'm feeling in that moment. And I can tell almost immediately if those colors work for me. I can feel it in my mouth. If the color doesn't work, it feels like I've eaten something too sweet. It almost hurts. And if I feel like it's working, there's a softness in my mouth, and I've learned to trust it. Composition still continues to be important. I invoke those bridges, repeating lines, space, openness, and that feeling of moving through. Hand and slow kind of go together. I like to do everything by hand. I like the slight undulations and imperfections of my hand sewing, and I am slow when I do it, and I'm really okay with that, and that's a good feeling. And instinctual. These pieces kind of build from the middle out. I don't have a plan, but I add and subtract instinctually as I go. The piece really tells me what's coming next, what's working and not working, and when it's finished. But most importantly, I've learning to trust my process and my quilt making. Thank you.
Thank you, Aimee. They're just so extraordinarily beautiful. I love these colors and the way you talk about them and the abundance of work that you've made in class so far. Also, it's been very exciting seeing the comments coming through. I see so many familiar faces, both other students from class and students who I know from when I was teaching in Japan, from diary quilting. It's just a really lovely mix of people that I'm seeing in the comments. So thank you very much for sharing so much. I know that Aimee's going to love reading those.
Thank you.
Okay. Over to Barbara.
Apparently I have many keynotes open, but that's the one we want. Hi everybody, thank you so much. I'm just gonna move my phone there so I can see my face. I really enjoyed hearing Aimee talk, partly because I think like the things we're thinking about and working on are pretty different, but I think you'll also see a lot of similar themes about kind of what we're getting out of the course. I did a little thinking about like my own personal journey as a quilter, and like this year has really been a journey. Over there on the left is the first quilt I ever made, which was back in 2000. I think not unlike many people, I made my first quilt when I was pregnant with my oldest child. I made a couple quilts then. They did not, it did not stick. Quilting did not stick for me at that point. This was machine pieced and machine quilted, which I don't really do much of. Certainly not machine quilting anymore. But I did start collecting their baby clothes. I had some notion that I would want to do something with them, which I have subsequently. And then that quilt in the middle, which is a fairly small quilt, was the first thing I finished in 2024 after I started the class. And then the quilt on the left, I mean on the right, is the most recent quilt I finished, and I'm going to talk about that a little more. One of the really interesting things about this class has been the way that it has given me sort of vocabulary to talk about what I was already making. Um, and, you know, getting to think about what kind of quilts, not only that I'm interested in making, but that I've already made. And whether it was about aesthetics, or especially what really blew my mind was recognizing that there are a lot of conceptual interests that connect and run through a lot of the things that I make. And I couldn't have articulated that before. And the photograph there is just, I sort of made this concept map on my wall with pictures of different things I'd made, and seeing how many of the different themes that I get really excited about and I'm interested in have shown up in a lot of my work, and leaning into that. What I really want to talk about is this idea of generosity to my practice. This is something that Heidi first talked about when I took diary quilting. And the whole notion of it just really struck me. And this idea of devoting our precious resources to quilting. And, you know, certainly one of those most precious resources is time, but also money. And you know, so I would say also this is a picture of an expensive piece of linen I bought to make a whole cloth quilt, which for me was kind of a wild extravagance because mostly I haven't spent any money ever on any fabric for quilts. It just sort of, I use whatever has come my way, but I really had this like feeling about making a whole cloth quilt out of really dreamy soft linen. And so I just did it. And in terms of time, I'm somebody who tends to rush and also tends to worry about my ability to finish things. And so it's a pretty radical move for me to slow down and take my time, and even to make the choice to do things in a intentionally labor intensive way. Um, and that has been super satisfying for me. And I've really enjoyed that. And I guess I would just say, like, the first act of generosity to my practice really was just signing up for this class and devoting time. But just in general, um, making the conscious choice that my resources are going to support my practice. I'm also, I feel like one of the most important ways I am learning, I wouldn't say I have learned, I'm learning to be generous to my practice is by letting go of limiting beliefs. And these are three big ones for me. One that is I'm not an artist. One is that I can't keep track of multiple projects. And the other is that if I make something too involved, or if something's going to take too long, I will not be able to sustain my attention and finish it. And I included the photo of this particular quilt because it was really leaning into letting go of especially those last two limiting beliefs. When I decided to start it, I really had a lot of other things going on, but this particular project was really calling to me. And so I made the decision to go ahead and start it, even though I already had a lot of things going on. And also, a lot of the decisions I made about making it were intentionally choosing, I wouldn't say inefficient, but labor intensive techniques to sew it. So I knew it was going to take a while to do it. And no regrets. And part of it was an act of faith that I would be able to sustain my attention and finish it, which I did do. And I realized as I was thinking about this presentation that part of all this is really just like, how do I honor my artistic impulses? And, I feel like I'm very new to thinking of myself as an artist, thinking like an artist rather than just, I guess, than somebody who follows a pattern. And so really leaning into like the play and the experimentation of trying lots of new things as they strike me, not editing, not overthinking, using weird materials, um, using extravagant materials, having other people cut my fabric, which is what this is an illustration of, where other people cut out the fabric for a quilt, and just generally just not filtering and trying lots of new things, as well as taking risks of, I guess, of an emotional sort in terms of making the choice to include some pretty personal content in my work and how to navigate that. This is a series of quilts I made, and one of our modules is about working in a series. And one of the really interesting things about that module for me was reflecting how often I already was working in series and how much that process resonates for me. And I was midway through this series when we started the series module. And this series is really about my mother is lives with me about 8 months of the year, and I'm her primary caregiver. And a really important part of her daily ritual is tea, and I make a lot of tea for her. And so these are these have a lot of, they're about tea, but they're also about family, and they're about caregiving, and they're about trash and order and chaos and lots of things that that are of interest to me. Words. Number one, I got the inspiration because at the place in our kitchen where we make tea, I noticed that our kitchen counter was getting stained. And so I was interested in seeing if I could basically catch that stain and use it to make a quilt. So I laid down a quilt sandwich with muslin on top in this square of counter and left it there, I think for about a month. And these are all the tea stains that were on it, and used the tea to guide my quilting. It was also guided somewhat by, there were other items like my mix master and an electric kettle that were on there. And this was also my first adventure in putting text into a quilt that I wanted to keep private. And so there is some text. I apologize because I know it's hard to see because it's white on white, but I put some text in the quilt, and we had a lot of conversation in the class about, what would I do with that? And what I ended up doing was using the pieces of the letters to make hearts. And then it's sort of a row of hearts and lines and things that sort of obscures the text to preserve my privacy and the privacy of my family. Number two was totally different. My mom really loves put stevia in her tea, and so there are a lot of stevia packets that pile up, and at some point I just started like putting them in a jar that was in the kitchen, and I was like, maybe I'll do something with these stevia packets. So one of the things I did here was I did a whole bunch of experiments, which we called the stevia studies, with sewing with the stevia packets, because I didn't know what it was going to be like to sew with paper. So I machine sewed and I hand sewed, and then I mounted these onto cardstock. We had looked at some work from Deb Sokolow, is that right? And I really liked, I was really interested in her sort of style of documentation. So I did a lot of documentation about what exactly I did. And then I used that to then make this quilt out of stevia packets. And it used so many packets that at one point I had to stop because I ran out and I had to wait for my mom to use more. And then most recently I've made this, the number 3, which there's been a little bit of a break because I was sort of mulling on this one. I started saving tea bags and I wanted to use tea bags. And my quilting cohort got me interested in the idea of taking advantage of the transparency of the tea bags as a way to have something behind that was obscured. And so of course that's also of interest to me, like telling a story that's private or secret, but I can have it in the quilt, but it isn't necessarily for public consumption. So what I did here was I printed some of my own writing onto inkjet fabric with some size differences, and then I cut it up and pieced it into the base of the quilt. And part of what was pretty exciting and interesting to me is actually just that process of cutting and piecing really obscured the literal content of the text. So I'm pretty excited about exploring that some more. But it still needed some tea bags. So then I machine appliqued, and that was actually a quilting step. I made the quilt sandwich and then I machine appliqued the tea bags on top. I had hoped to hand quilt the center part, but the inkjet fabric was pretty tough to work with. So I ended up using ties, which I'm pretty happy with because they give a little bit of a sort of tea bag vibe. And really I just want to finish. I feel like I said this out loud in class and it really resonated. That I feel like the core of being generous to my practice is that it's allowed me to experience the joy of making things that are wholly and authentically my own, and also experience the sort of the way those pieces like really get a hold on me, so that I have to make them, and really following those pieces that insist on being made. And just trusting that and going with it. And it's really amazing to be part of a community where there's so much encouragement to trust. And I thought it was interesting. Aimee also talked about trust, but this idea of trusting ourselves and our own sort of artistic voice and vision, and where that's taking us. Okay, I'll stop.
Barbara, thank you so much. That was just incredible to get to see everything throughout the year and your thoughts about it. It's also so special that you and Aimee signed up to share back to back, because you are our 2 people who also knew each other beforehand and live nearby. And so you get the extra joy of watching a module and then talking together about the module and discussing things and hanging out in each other's studios, and just getting to watch 2 friends sign up for the class at the same time. It has been just an incredible source of joy. And you two are in different days, so you're not in the same small group. And I think maybe that makes it a little bit richer also, that you get to report back and share some different aspects of what's been going on in your group.
We definitely highly recommend signing up with an in real life friend. 10 out of 10 for that.
Absolutely. Okay, over to Eleanor. You can start sharing your screen. And Barbara, make sure that you read the comments. They are just so joyful and exciting to see what people are writing about your work and the way that you are thinking about your work.
Hey everyone. It's so nice to be here. These presentations are so inspiring. I'm Eleanor Kagan. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. And so my background is actually as an audio producer, which over the last 15 years has sort of made this journey from public radio, interviews to podcast, documentary work. And these are some of the shows that I've worked on in the past. And, you know, it's fascinating work, but notably, it is work that I've never been able to touch or hold in my hands. And so when I started sewing in 2019, I started sewing clothes because I love to get dressed. And the first quilty thing I ever made was actually this quilted jacket, which I pieced and made from scratch. And I also made these 2 baby quilts for friends. And, you know, working from patterns or working from sort of pre-existing designs. And those were all really fun. And, you know, in retrospect, I sort of think of this as phase 1 of my quilting journey. Phase 2 started last October when I learned about Heidi Parkes. I learned about the diary quilting class. And I thought that it was such an amazing thing that an artist was so generous and willing to teach us her very particular craft, which in this case involves creating a diary of a moment in your life in the form of a quilt. So this is what I made. And in the process, I learned how to hand sew. And so this is a mix of machine hand sewing and embroidery and applique, and there's beads and feathers and all sorts of stuff on it. I also fabric marbled a lot of the pieces in here. And working on this really unlocked something in me, which was this idea of creating narrative story-driven quilts, and that was a thing that I needed to do. And that is why I signed up for this class. I found that I really like making quilts from unused or used and found clothing. Like this one, which is called I Hate This Underwear, but the fabric can't be recycled, so I'm using them for this instead of throwing them in the trash. Because that is literally true. And the next one I made is this one, which is called Daddy Said No. It is based on a red velvet dress that my aunt made for me when I was 5. And it was a really important piece of clothing for me because it was the first piece of clothing that actually made me feel like myself. And I often refused to take it off, even when my parents like needed me to wear something else, hence the title. And this is also a mix of hand and machine. And I love log cabins because I think it's a really beautiful representation of quilt history and also the home. But I wanted to mix that with something I don't know, mildly subversive and something that felt like me. So, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Heidi's class this year figuring out my process and my style. And it's given me a lot of space and opportunity to think about why I'm making things the way that I am, and how I like to work. So, you know, I love talking to quilters who approach quilts completely like starting something, having no idea what's going to happen next. And I do work like that sometimes, but usually when I work, I tend to have a story in mind, something I want to say, some initiating object like the red velvet dress. And I have sort of a vision in my head of what I want to make or a feeling that I want to convey. And sometimes I'll make a sketch. But then from there, quilting for me is a series of solving puzzles. And I often find that the solution to the puzzle is where the surprise and the serendipity and the delight comes from. I never know the path that anything is going to take. And I am basically trying to figure out how to make this vision in my head turn into something that I can hold in my hands. Which brings me to my one, I've had many big lessons and takeaways from this year, but I'm just going to focus on one for the next couple of minutes. My big takeaway from this year. So Heidi always says, one thing that we're working on is to try to figure out she says, I tried to figure out what a Heidi Parkes quilt looks like. So I've been trying to figure out what an Eleanor Kagan quilt looks like. And the lesson I've learned is that I need to let the quilt be what it wants to be, which is not necessarily what I think it should be. The quilt has a mind of its own, and the quilt often goes to a place that I'm not expecting. And I have to be willing to let it evolve away from my original idea to see it through to what it wants to be. This is my most recent finish. It's called Tip Well, Tip Often. And so I'm gonna talk about how this quilt came into being through a life of its own. So my local quilt guild here in Brooklyn has a show coming up, and there was a prompt, The Stories We Tell, Folklore, Fantasy, and Folly. And when I first learned about this, the words fantasy and folly immediately brought me into one very specific room in Brooklyn, which is a tiny back room in a gay bar that is Western themed in Brooklyn, and specifically seeing my favorite queer and trans drag and burlesque collective called Switch and Play perform in that room. And, since I do like to say things with my quilt, I really wanted the words tip well, tip often to feature in the quilt, because when we are seeing artists perform, it's good to show them that we appreciate them with our money. And so I was on a plane when I came up with this idea, and these were my first initial sketches of kind of what I saw in my head. I knew I wanted there to be some kind of central image that would be representative of like a spotlight on a stage, but I didn't really know yet how to achieve that. And I wanted the Western vibe to come through. So I often like starting by kind of creating a mood board and collecting references. These quilts by the artist Carson Ellis first came to mind. I really admire their symmetry and their design. And I love that they are a mixture of some like traditional quilting shapes and blocks like the flying geese and the pinwheels, but they also have these wholly original designs. I also wanted to include this idea of the nudie suit by Nudie Cone, which really took off in the 60s and 70s. You've probably seen like Dolly Parton wearing a suit like this. They also have that really gorgeous symmetry, and they're sparkly and they're fun and they're kind of campy. So I love those. I also love the personal style of the animal rights activist Temple Grandin. So she went on the mood board as well. The first thing that I did was I got really excited about the words. And so I appliqued and embroidered these two blocks to be sort of a central image in this quilt. I also went to the thrift store looking for sequins, which is a really fun assignment, which I recommend doing. And I'm also part of the quilting community, the Quilting Nook, and I put out a call for any sparkly or shiny materials that people might have, and folks delivered. I got a lot of mail of just tons of shiny things, which was really generous and really fun. The bandanas in here are also thrifted. The seersucker fabric is from the Free Table from my quilt guild. And there's some denim in here from a pair of jeans that I frankly always hated. So I was looking for inspiration for the sunburst idea. So I pulled these up, and, with the symmetrical idea for the border, I found these two quilts that use flying geese in a really beautiful way. I think they have a lot of dynamism, and they really, make the eye move around the composition. So these were all things that I was thinking about. So here's where I landed. As a sidebar, whenever my partner and I are cooking and it's at the point where we're like tasting what we're making, we often ask ourselves, does it have the POW? Which I think we got from Samin Nosrat's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And like, if it doesn't have the POW, we add more salt until it does. So I was looking at these and I was like, these do not have the POW. And when I'm in this moment and I'm feeling stuck in a compositional way, I go back to the books. So these are my two favorite books at the moment. They are just full of incredibly beautiful quilts. And in the G's Bend book, I found these, which, oh my God, they're these incredible Lone Star quilts made in the 70s. They are just a maximalist feast for the eyes. My favorite one is by Lucy T. Petway. And I love that she takes this traditional shape, the star, which is one of the most like iconic, historical, recognizable quilt designs out there, and she makes it her own by adding these additional elements in the corners. She quilted for 7 decades. The other one I loved is by R.B. Williams, who, as a sidebar, is responsible for what I think is my favorite quilt ever made, which is this overalls quilt, because I love working with clothes. But hers is also just incredibly beautiful, using found materials, old clothes, feed sacks. It incorporates a lot of different design elements. So armed with these, I went back to the drawing board. I made a Lone Star. It was hard. I'm not a very precise cutter and sewer, but it's cool. We did it. We persevered. And then when it came time to add in my original elements, the tip well, tip often, it like didn't have the pow again. Something just didn't feel like it fit. And I tried a lot of different fabrics, but it was not giving me the feeling that like the R.B. Williams or the Lucy T. Petway quilt was giving. So I went back to the books again. And I went back even farther when it came to stars. And I found this quilt by Fanny Sales Tribute, which I think is really beautiful. There's something about the all black background with different things in the corners that makes it feel cohesive, but really energetic. And you know, I had all these sequined and beaded patches from another dress that I thrifted. And as soon as I put them in the corners, I got the pow. It was giving nudie suit. It was feeling Western. It was feeling draggy, dare I say. It felt right. And I really wanted the words tip well, tip often to still appear in this quilt that felt like an important part of the message. And I don't know how other people feel about this. I'm often loath to like redo work, but they needed to be here. So I redid them. I made them smaller. I reappliqued them. I embroidered them. They're a little bit subtler now, but they're still there because that message was still important. I changed the manicure from red to pink for what it's worth. So honestly, at this point, I was feeling really good about the composition. As a nod to drag performers, I wanted to add rhinestones, which I did, which was very fun. I hand quilted with this metallic thread. And here she is. I took this picture on my roof this morning in the sunshine. It's very sparkly. And, you know, in a lot of ways, it doesn't really look like my initial sketch, which here it is again, but it kind of does. But I think importantly, it has the feeling that I had when I made this initial sketch. You know, funnily enough, once a quilt is done, I can never really imagine it looking any other way. I love the saying that the best endings are both surprising and inevitable. And that's how I know when I've hit on a good idea and the solution to the quilt puzzle, you know, when I'm like, oh, that's so obvious. But of course it wasn't obvious, or I would have started there. And so it's never obvious, but it always feels inevitable. And that I have learned is an incredibly satisfying feeling to feel at the end of a quilting journey. And I never would have figured that out and been able to have the language to talk about this if I wasn't in community with this wonderful group of people. So thank you so much for listening. Here's how to get in touch with me. Here's some info about the quilt show if anyone's in the New York area and would like to show up. And have a great day, everybody.
Eleanor, thank you. Similarly, I'm so excited for you get to read the chat. People are just loving it so much. And you have such a natural gift as a storyteller. You've turned the making of this particular quilt into like a detective story. It's just it's amazing. And I see so many different elements of class coming through with that commitment to researching and understanding the history of the techniques that you use. Maybe to some people counterintuitively, the techniques module is not me teaching people how to do things, but instead it is unpacking the way that I decided I wanted to do things and how I found the techniques that felt right and that fit for me. And sometimes an idea and a quilt just makes you want to need to learn diamonds and how to piece them together. And then you go for it and you figure it out. And that, you know, even this quilt behind me is the first time that I ever did an any corner, that interior corner. I had been terrified of it previously. And then this one said to me, no, Parkes, you have to learn how to do this technique. So that, you know, bit of the techniques module that I'm seeing in this story, along with your incredible commitment to research and make a quilt that feels right and true to you. I so appreciate you taking pictures all along the way so that you could share with us those moments where you did a gut check and it just didn't quite feel right. And then you found the thing that did feel right. Okay, amazing. Over to Silvia. We can have you unmute and share your screen.
Yes. Wait a second.
And we are so lucky Silvia's joining us from Germany, where it is 10 p.m. if I'm not wrong.
Nearly, yes, it is. Yes. Okay. Okay, let's go. I'm a little bit nervous. This is not my language, but I try my best. My name is Silvia Erhard, and you can find me as Silvia McDormand on Instagram. I live with my husband and a very old blind cat in a small town near Munich in Germany. I'm a social worker and sex therapist. It's both part-time and I work a lot. I have my own counseling office since 2023. I'm sitting there right now. Yeah, and there's still a lot of work to do. I'm still in further education after graduation. That means I spend a lot of time in workshops and seminars. I counted the days for this year, and at the end of the year, I will have spent 56 days in seminars. So really, I'm working a lot. And the first quilt I ever made was in 2005. It was about self-help. I had a crisis then. I was 25 years old and I spent 2 weeks at my parents' house, not really sure what to do next. And my mother had a book. It was for myself, it was pre-internet time. I found a book about patchwork and that helped me a lot. And I spent the next few days figuring out how to make such a quilt. And since then, I have made quilts occasionally, but it was like an on-off relationship. Although quilting gave me stability and a lot of joy, it was very important to me. And I think it's like a self-help thing. I really love it, but I lost connection very often. This is the first quilt. You can see it's a very simple quilt, traditional blocks, sewn by machine. You cannot see the quilting really, it's nearly invisible. You can see something special. The binding is a little bit unconventional. That's typical for me. I used a milliner's ribbon because I didn't know how to do it. Now I know how I can do a good binding, but I'm often not so interested in. And this quilt was made as a blanket. It was about function. This was my starting point. The course, why? Why did I choose Heidi's course? Apart from the fact that I really appreciate her as an artist and as a teacher anyway, my questions were, how can I stick with quilting better? I wanted to clarify this question. The second one was, is it art or not? We've heard of it already. And that was a big question for me at the beginning of the course, which has almost been answered right now. In addition to the course itself, working in a different language really helped. It's much easier for me to say in English, I'm an artist, than in German to say, ich bin eine Künstlerin. It's a bigger word. In English, it's like, okay, it's art, it's an artist, it's easy claiming. And yes, it's about skills. My sewing and design skills. In general, I think I still use the sewing techniques my mom taught me and the techniques I learned in my millinery training as a young woman. So there was really development needed, I think, and it works. And this is my first course ever in quilting, with a direct interaction with real people. It's the second workshop I booked in my life. The first one was scrap quilts from Heidi Parkes, and this is the second one. So I was looking for community, for real people, real people, real interaction, and I was just curious, can I manage this? Is it interesting? Yes. So I'm very proud of myself that I did it. Yeah. Okay, my most important insights in this course. These are three. It was not easy to choose them. Limitations are real and one of my most favorite conceptual interests. I have a limitation problem, I would say. Limitations, the picture you see shows a very early summer morning at my kitchen table. That's a very typical time for me, a time slot I have available for sewing. My limitations are time. I have 2 jobs, I'm self-employed, a lot of training, family, friends, and the blind old cat. Space, I don't have a real studio. The size of the apartment is the limit, or the train, and my technical skills are limited too. Yeah, and in the beginning I struggled a lot with the time issue, because there are no whole days for quilting in my life right now. There are not. And was like, okay, it was really a big thing for me to understand, okay, use what you have. Early mornings, the cat cries a lot at night and gets up very early, so 5:30, that's my time. Commuting by train, there are time slots too, and Zoom calls. And prepare my sewing items for travel. I have to travel once a month for training, for education, and it's necessary to be prepared. And that works too. And my absolute most favorite and very important thing is working in a series. That saves a lot of time, because some decisions on material, size, and technique are already made. And it challenges me to find out what is possible in this within this framework. That's very interesting for me. The cat. This presentation would be okay without the cat. She's 17 years old, blind, and a very old lady, but really, I love her dearly. Yes. This is a quote from my, not yet finished, but I have it, artist statement from module 8. And I'm very proud to have something like that. Just rawness, you know, is my thing. Yes, it's about rawness. That's my second conceptual interest. I didn't know. This is what I found out. This quilt was made in 2021. There is no binding, raw edges, a lot of folds. It has an improvisational approach. It was sewn by hand and machine, a lot of mixing. And it's my first artsy, I don't know if you can say it like that, kind of quilt. It represents my self-reflection on my sexuality made for a final exam. And it was an inner need to get this thing into a quilt or on a quilt. I'm not sure how to name it. And I think that's the starting point as an artist. Yes. And rawness is still on top of conceptual interest, but my new interests are color and joy. You will see them later. Keep going. Don't let yourself be stopped by the thought that this quilt is not exactly as perfect as it meant to be in your vision. That's my big problem. I have an idea, I have a vision, I have a feeling, and then in real life, it's not like that. It's about quilting and not masterpieces. That's very helpful for me. I set the goal, I want to live an artsy life with quilting, so I have to spend time with art and quilting and not thinking about it, just doing it. This is what brings joy into my life. And every quilt teaches me something technical and about myself. On the right side, you can see a quilt with a lot of yellow. Yellow is really my most challenging color, followed by orange. And with this quilt, it came, okay, yellow is okay, and overlapping, also horror for me, is okay too. And even if I don't like the quilt, I like what it means to me. So, and some works are more appealing to others than to myself. That's okay too. And concentrate on doing again. Concentrate on doing in everyday life, not on the results. Otherwise, you will stop again and start thinking and thinking and thinking. That's not my way anymore. I'm doing. Yes, and our time is fleeting. Some insights in my current work. I do a lot of train sewing, usually whole cloth quilts. I'm doing a lot of commuting by train, 3 days a week usually, and it's about 25 minutes one route. I don't know the word. Yes, this one is called Soft Waves 1. The quilting here imitates the train tracks. And as you can see, I decided to use the back side as the front side. You can see all the knots and the threads. This is Soft Waves 2. Here the quilting follows the seams of the pleat. I like it also very much. And again, that's the back side, no binding. Different, it's the same framework, but it's a different look. And this is number 3. It's still in progress. The first half you can see here is done. And the second, I cut the big piece in half so I can work on it on the train because it's so big. I think it's a so-called Überlaken. That's a special German thing for a special bedsheet, kind of bedsheet. And it's 220 x 110 or 120 big centimeters. So it's pretty big, and it's just, this is the half. This is the finished half in front of my house. The pictures were taken in front of my house. It's early morning again. And I like the combination of tracks and the street. This is what sewing on the train looks like. And here another quilt of mine. It's more about joy and color, still rawness and texture. And here, please notice, you can see the quilting is much more important than in 2005. It's really, I think the quilting thing is really the most important thing to me at all. I just love to do it, and it's, I think pleating and quilting is very close, and I like it. Yes, and the last one, Antwerp, Belgium. I had the idea, I was in Antwerp in Belgium at the end of August. You can reach it in one day from Germany. And I wanted to look at a graffiti by a certain artist. That's why I went to Antwerp for 3 or 4 graffitis. And this one was the first I saw, and unfortunately, it was already sprayed over. The lower part is not, it's not about the car. The lower part of the graffiti is, it's graffiti, and the upper part, this is the graffiti I was traveling to, why I traveled to Antwerp. And that was really, yes. Please pay attention to the pink little arrows. These are mine. I have used these aspects in my quilt. Maybe you can see it. It's still in progress. It's not finished. And I did a lot of sewing on the way to Antwerp and back home. I bought a stamp there. I used on the quilt top, I used some marker and just painted on the top. And it's a lot of, for my kind of, or for my style, it's a lot of overlapping. More is more, and layering as much as possible. And I'm still trying to figure it out if I like it, but it's great fun to do it. Yeah, and I think that's it. Thank you. These are the most beautiful scissors I ever had, really. And I use them on my train soon and really like them. Thank you.
Oh, Sylvia, I'm so happy to hear that. I had so much fun assembling special gifts for students and mailing them out and giving everyone 2 pairs of scissors and 2 hand care tools and 2 embroidery hoops. And so it's been really wonderful seeing how people have enjoyed using those tools. Sylvia, I could just listen to you in your accent all day long.
Okay, I have an accent. Shit.
Oh, your English. No, it's just you have such a beautiful voice. It's so beautiful. And thank you for taking us on that journey with you, especially the way that you were able to articulate how you have learned more how to say yes to fitting quilting into your life, and that you don't need some perfect separate circumstance and space, but that you're able to sew as you are today, and just the courage that you had signing up for such a big class as the second sewing class that you ever took. And it's just been going so well. You've been making so many things and trusting your creative voice and working in multiple series. And I'm very excited for you to get to read the comments that accumulated while you were sharing, because they're really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, over to Karen. We'll have you start to share. And Cal, my friend Cal, has commented about the graffiti. And, I would say that that's one of the really special things we talked about in the aesthetics module, of looking at things and really starting to unpack what it is that you like about them specifically. And when you take those teeny tiny details, like what you put the arrows towards, and bring them into your own work, no one will ever come and say, oh, Sylvia's just copying graffiti all day long in her work. But instead, it's just this really, cancel that, minimize. Had quite a pop-up here. But it's taking those little nuggets, and it's actually a way of finding out, what does a Sylvia quilt look like? Is what are those little tiny bits of works of art that you're drawn to repeatedly, that you enjoy? Okay, Karen, it looks like you're all set up. Over to you.
All right, and you can just see my main screen, right? Just
Yes, this looks perfect.
I don't need you guys to see my notes, so. But hello, everyone. I want to thank Heidi for giving me the opportunity to speak today in this forum. And I'm excited to share the work and the experiences that I've had so far over the past 8 months. I think mine is maybe a little bit different because there's different focuses I have. There's still some sewing in there. So first, a little about me. My name's Karen. I live in Danvers, Massachusetts. I'm in a town located north of Boston. By day, I work full-time as a director of supply chain for a small pharmaceutical company that specializes in rare disease. On a personal note, I am a proud mother of 2 wonderful young women and our beloved cat, Hunter. There he is. He's young. He's only a couple of years old, so he still keeps me on my toes. In my free time, I love being outdoors and enjoy activities such as open water swimming and biking and hiking. And so when I was given this opportunity to speak today, I had to go back and reflect on the past 8 months and really look through all the different modules that we've gone through. I have so many pictures of different things that I've done over the course of 8 months, and I'm just amazed at how much I've grown since I started this journey. So I want to share with you some of my experiences and some of the pieces I created. But to do that, I need to start in the beginning. So I've been sewing since about 10, hand and machine. I bought my first machine from a boyfriend's mother when I was probably about 14. And that was a workhorse. It lasted about 25 years. But whether I'm stitching by hand or machine, I find joy in creating something unique. And in recent years, my passion has evolved to include upcycling clothing. So like Eleanor, I love fashion. My closet is filled. I love all things fashion. But part of this was just taking discarded, worn out, and torn materials and giving them just a new lease on life. It's been fun and rewarding. The jacket I actually did as a virtual Secret Santa for a woman I didn't know in New York. And I took a blanket and a jacket. I just didn't like the way it fit. Scoured her Instagram just to see what she would like. I made the hexie and the sleeves, and then it did some hand stitching around just for embellishment. And then the pants really torn up, but that's bark cloth that was given to me by my cousin, and I wanted to applique that on. So I hand stitched all of that applique on. I love these pants. So this experience in upcycling has, one, improved my sewing skills, not only in garment construction, because using thrifted materials, you never know what you're going to get, and it's been worn and stretched. And then also it's reinforced a commitment to be more sustainable in my practice. So when I really did look back, I realized in 2022 was really the start of my quilt journey. I found this quilt in a small little thrift barn. I don't know what drew it to me. It's not really my style of colors. I think the fact that it was so damaged that she called out to me and said, please fix me. So I picked her up for a few dollars and then saw that it was hand pieced and hand quilted. And so that was very intriguing. But what I did is I actually unpicked all the damaged squares and then measured them and then hand sewed them back in. I think based on what I've learned so far this year, if looking back, I would do it slightly different and probably would applique over it or add some different embellishments, but I did keep the integrity of the quilt as it was. And now it's one of mine and my hunter's favorite quilts to snuggle together in the cooler weather. So my first full-size quilt was a memory quilt for my best friend, Helen. And although I had never constructed one before, she trusted that I could figure it out. And this was all fabric from her mom, who had passed away. And that was another daunting feature, is how was I going to take all these different types of fabric, rayon, cotton, etc., and pull them together. And having never constructed one before, I just went with a 4-patch. I thought it was the easiest thing for me to do. So I machine piece tied and hand quilted it, and then it ended up being a full size. So it's my biggest quilt so far. And then I used every fabric piece that she gave me. And then when I gave it to her, she said it was like a hug from my mom. I wanted to cry. So that was really special. And I think the other piece why it took me so long is at the same time, a couple of months after her mom passed, my mom passed too. So it took me a while to get into the groove to be able to make this. So why did I choose this class? I know this has come up with pretty much everybody, but I saw it as an opportunity to learn from Heidi as a great instructor. I've taken some of her story quilt on demand class, and I thought when I got the email, and I went back to that email recently just to see when the first reach out, and I debated on it, and I said, I got to sign up before the Sunday slots take over. So, and this was a year dedicated to deepen my practice. I also hope to acquire new skills to add to my toolbox for any future goals and aspirations that I may have coming out of this. And this was also a chance to invest in me and give myself permission to play and have fun. I was my mom's primary caregiver. She lived with us for 20 years. And so there was a big gap. I'm an empty nester now. And I'm like, what am I going to do to fill my time outside of work, which I work a lot. And so this was a chance for me to really invest in myself. And then it's also staying accountable. I'm accountable to the group. I'm accountable to the community and committed to a daily sewing practice. Even if I get 5 minutes in the morning before I hit the road, I have something in my hand. And then connect with and learn from all the other artists in the community. It's amazing who I've met so far. And this, another piece is, this is a way for me to step out of my comfort zone. You know, and I understand learning new things are uncomfortable. However, I believe in taking risks and trying new things, and it's essential for my personal growth. And I have to think back is when I think of open water swimming, I'm uncomfortable every time I hit the water. So I was in it today. I'm scared, I'm uncomfortable, but it gets better every time I do it. So I really wanted to focus on exploration this year. And then as part of some of the modules was to go out and visit different exhibits and locations for inspiration. So I have done local, the Peabody Essex Museum. I went to the New England Quilt Museum for the first time. I had no idea it was even here in Massachusetts. The Brush Gallery, which had an amazing quilt exhibit recently, the Boston MFA, and then when I was recently in New York, I spent a half day at MoMA and got completely arted out there, but it was amazing. I also delved into several books because one of the modules was to give yourself a break, and taking in recommendations from different artists from the group. I really focused on some of the things that are core to me, and it was around Wabi Sabi for artists, designers, poets, and philosophers by Leonard Cohen. From Reese Freeman Zachary, it was Creative Time and Space, which really fit into one of the modules, and making room for art, and then living the creative life. And then currently I'm reading Digital Fiber Art by Wen Redman. And this is going to help me develop more of the technique of image transfer. And then this recent one, Art and Fear, Observations on the Perils and Rewards of Art Making, by David Bales and Ted Orlin. This one is very interesting. It's a very short read, but it really is fitting in making art, and ordinary art is okay. So these resources have been incredibly informative, inspiring, and supportive. And then, as you might have guessed, as I've talked, I love to learn. So in addition to Heidi's class, I've taken multiple virtual and on-demand workshops to improve my techniques. These are a few. And then I love this quote from Shelley Rhodes about the continuous process of development and exploration in her creative journey. So one never stops developing, adjusting, figuring out what works well, as discovering new approaches and taking risks. So these are some of my makes. So I went back and looked. I've done a lot of small work. I haven't done anything big since my Helen quilt. But I tried to experiment around collage just to see if I liked it, with a pattern. From one of the workshops, did a stitch book. Rust dye was inspired by Alice Fox. She did quite a series on it. I listened to her artist talk about it, using either collected seawater. I did vinegar and rusted objects found around the house, and then turned that into a quilt. And what I did is I hand stitched around the rust pieces that really called to me, and did different techniques, whether it was a more dense stitching, seed stitching, running stitch, a little bit of color in the center, kind of looks like a bug. But this one I really did enjoy. And then the binding on it was inspired by a photograph I took on my trail ride, where there was a blue pipe sticking out a bunch of rusted leaves. I also buried fabric. This was inspired by a talk given by Emma Freeman. And this was a result of a t-shirt after a couple of months. And I've buried more in my yard just to see what it looks like. It's most of my mistakes that I've done in the image transfer, just to see if I can get some unique marks on it. And then I painted this little back patch as part of a prompt for Destroy This Quilt with the Quilting Nook and Zach Foster. So working small, most of my pieces are probably 8, maybe up to 20 inches. So what I found that this was a great way to keep up with my practice as it's portable, like Silvia had said, from when I travel. It also gives me a chance to work on different lengths, different densities. You know, I did a spiral. I do have some text in the middle of the small piece, and just trying different things to see what resonates with me, whether it's applique or paint. In the center is the most recent piece. I like this photograph. It's part of the module on photographing your work. I'm getting better along the way. And then the fabric vases. I am really hooked on these. I have done so many. And this, it was one of my favorite on-demand classes. And so the top one is actually mask templates that I acquired from another quilter, and I love the colors and I thought it would make a great little vase for myself. So they vary in size. I am working on a very large one based on what Heidi did the last time. So imagery and layers, and this is where I think through all my experimentation and play is really where I've discovered a deep interest. I'm currently exploring and testing various fabric transfer techniques using materials I already own, which includes my inkjet printer. So I'm trying not to invest too much, and all of these are pretty small. I think I just want to use them as testers and visuals to see what's going to last and what's not. My dad, it was a photographer, and he documented our family history until he passed away in 2003. He always had a camera in his hand. So I have an abundance of materials to choose from. So these are some of my early transfers I did with his collection of photos. It's my mom and him and my grandparents. And so I hope to really continue to delve into this and looking at different layering techniques with the photos onto the fabric. So it wouldn't just be a single photo. It could be layered in multiple ways. And then the other piece is a recent piece. I added the layers of buried fabric, which I had actually, after I pulled it out, had dyed it black and thought it just fit into the theme of these 2 individuals. So I haven't figured it out all yet, what all of this is going to look like, but I'm excited to continue on with this journey. So I finally have a dedicated space to work, and that's me. A recent picture I took in my studio. What I didn't mention is I'm also a ceramist, so in the background are, you really can't see them, they're blurred, but they're a most recent vases that I made. But I really just wanted to focus on that back piece. That's my Destroy This Quilt. That's what it is so far. It's a lot for me. There's a lot of stuff on here. So it's, but the more I look at it and the more I really look at the different prompts and what I've done with it, I'm really starting to enjoy how this is coming together. So my focus of what's next is to finish this course, complete the Destroy This Quilt, continue to work on my image transfers to fabric. You know, I do want to note that first one down the bottom, that one down the bottom is my mom and my Nana, is one of my first attempts as putting it on fabric. So I'm really hoping to improve this as time goes on. And then I really want to scale up. The work I do is very small, but I think it's time for me to look at what a larger piece by me looks like. So in thinking of potential goals for 2025 is you know, again, focused more on the imagery, text and layering, and potentially launching a website. I'm still mulling it over. So if you'd like to follow me on my journey, you can find my work on Instagram at BobbyFrancis1929. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to me today.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing. That was wonderful to see the scope of your work. And I love that you mentioned Destroy That, this quilt. That is another thing that is in Zach Foster's Quilty Nook, which came up earlier. And the Nook is a very popular and frequent topic of conversation in our class. The two spaces work so well together. If you haven't checked out that space with Zach, I would highly recommend it. I know Barbara found it very helpful to be rehearsing the other day with some teammates in the Nook, and so that's just a really fun thing to connect with. Also, Karen, I love that you brought up the vases. I've been making a lot of vases lately for 2 different exhibitions. And so during one of our co-working sessions, that's what I happened to be working on. And especially if I'm working on something unique or interesting or different from the last time, I'll try to show what I'm up to or give frequent updates. And so it was awesome to have had Karen recently take the vase class on demand and then notice some variations in how I was working on something very, very large. I was using a Bacardi rum bottle, and previously I was using like a 3-ounce vitamin bottle when I taught the class. So there are a few things that were different. And another one of the benefits of being in the quilt making class is that students get access to purchasing my other classes, whether they're lectures or patterns or on-demand classes, or if I do a live class, that they get a 50% off discount for the year. So it will end when they graduate, but it's a nice way that if one of those classes come up, like my Instagram class when we're working on photography, or the framed quilts when we're working in a series, that it allows folks to not feel like I've charged them once and then charge again, but instead that there's, you know, a really robust discount that makes it hopefully feel very accessible. And now over to our closer, we've got Sarah Lind, so you can unmute and share your screen. I'm so excited for Sarah to be able to share with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm so curious too, because we didn't do this yet, but if anyone like whoever's still on, I'd love to hear where you're from in the chat too. See where everyone's joining us from. I'm also in Brooklyn, like Eleanor.
Yeah,
but yes,
share where you are. Thank you.
So this year has been fun. I'm not a longtime quilter. I went to school for fashion design and work in costumes for film and television. So it's been a bit of a journey. I've always been kind of around sewing, but I'm really into old cars and road trips, and I have a Volkswagen bus. And so a lot of my sewing up until taking this class was very serviceable, like recovering of seats and, you know, the occasional clothing. But then during the writer's strike, I had a lot of time and wasn't working in film and TV. And so I ended up taking Heidi's story top quilt class, the on-demand one. And it was such an amazing intro because I was just so in love with quilts, and I was like, why don't I just make them? Because I know how to sew. And I think the thing that really attracted me to Heidi is the permission giving that she provides. Like, she makes it so open, and like it's so empowering to just feel like you can do anything. And so this rekindle is actually from my first quilt with her class, and it felt like it really rekindled my love of sewing, because clothes, you know, when you make clothes, you can't just randomly stitch things without measuring a lot and checking the fit. And so I very much have really enjoyed the quilting and the winging it part of just like, let's see how this goes. Let's see what's up. I made this arrow quilt. I did a mix of like one arrow is hand quilted, one or hand appliqued, one is machine. and vice versa, hand and machine quilted too. I also think, and one thing I really still continue to love about this class is the interest that drew me to it and noticing the evolution through time. So I started this class obsessed with words, trying to figure out how to incorporate them into quilts, loving them on all kinds of different things in art, in text design. And it's been so cool to see how the shared interests across mine and my classmates and our conversations have just expanded. And so this is just kind of a like slapped everything on there, but between books, and I think I'm realizing, Eleanor pointed this out in our last class too, I very much am a collector of quotes and words and lover of books, and maybe more of like a hoarder if we're being honest. But these artists here, so this bottom left-hand quote is from Gloria Steinem's book, My Life on the Road. We have the Art Department Rules by Karita Kent. And then just this collection of books that I've come across, I absolutely love, and have just inspired me and introduced so many different artists. A lot of this hand embroidery is by the artist Riko Koga, who I absolutely fell in love with, found during this class. And the dress at the bottom is actually by Susan Jameson, and I'm obsessed with this dress. She made it in 2013, and it's based on Virginia Woolf, and she called it the drowning dress. And those little drops are weights. And so it's kind of dark, but it's really cool. And so the thing I've been thinking about throughout this course, and it's a Heidi quote that I absolutely love, is that we talked about it in our conceptual interests part. And I think that element has really rung true to me this entire time. And Heidi talked about there's a richness. I'm actually like direct quoting here because I love this so much. There is a richness in having your concept be a stabilizing factor in your art and the medium be something that can move and shift. And so I've thought about that a lot. Like, we all come with these interests that grow and expand. And like, there's so many different ways. I mean, it's like how many people in this class, they do ceramics, they quilt, they make clothes, they paint, they do art. Like, there's so many wide varieties, I think, of the way we express ourselves. And so especially having it in this container, in this medium, in which it's so encouraging to experiment with and not do the traditional quilt piecing, quilt blocks that maybe we all started off with the idea of that's what this is. It's been really, really cool to see. And so it's like I started this class, I made this quilt for my brother for Christmas, and I was really interested in text and piecing, and it's been so cool to see how that's developed because I started collecting quotes. I love this this quote, sometimes I am more wolf than woman, so good, Rupi Kapoor. But just the experimentation, and I think it's such an interesting expansion. And I think we've all probably had this experience when we're in classes where there's just something where like your ideas bounce off other people in a really magical way. And it's like, there can be the tiniest little thread that someone says, and then it pops up in another way over here. And I kind of was thinking about this last week. Like, I think quilts and this class very much are like the way that books come into your life in the right time, where you just needed to read those words at that moment. And it's like the most electric feeling of just something clicked right then, and that's what you needed it to do. And I was thinking a lot too, like, I love how Heidi talks about how quilts are spells, because I totally believe that. And I also was thinking back to this ceramicist, I'm forgetting her name now, but they talked about the origins of pottery and how it serves both function and ceremony. And I think we've seen that a lot throughout this class, where it's like, there's kind of a, even in those like tiny moments, like Silvia's on the train, or like your 5 minutes in the morning before you leave for work, there's that element that it really like just sinks you down, and it's such a electric, good feeling, and it's calming and it's grounding, but it's also, I don't know, I think there's something magic about that. And so having that as in many ways the stabilizing factor of this year has been particularly wonderful. I think we all know the world is kind of insane and it keeps getting more insane. So it's been particularly nice to have something to return to and really, I think, just feel that repetition in a way that's like comfort and not a have to. And so this is a dandelion quilt I made, or it's still being made, but in the process of quilting. And one thing that got me thinking in the course of this class that's been really interesting has just been the connection of mind and hand. And when we were talking about different artists we love, I know Heidi talked about how much she loved or loves Mark Bradford. And I had been kind of working on this quilt about like a record skipping, mind spinning anxiety, just kind of as we navigate life. And this quote was actually in a talk that Mark Bradford gave. And so it kind of just led to this evolution where I was like, maybe I put this into a quilt. And so I actually stitched his direct quote into my quilt. And it's like, I think about my interest of where I started this class, of my interest in text, and then how it's evolved ever since. And I think that's a really particularly wonderful thing to notice as we go through time, because now we've been doing this for 8 months. We're into our 9th month. Like, and you feel like a sense of comfort. Like that's one thing that really also drew me to this class, is that it's small. Like each section has 10 people in it. It feels like personal. It feels safe. It feels like, and there's such a wide range. Like some people are brand new. Some people have been doing it for years and years. And that's also super comforting, because like, it's not just one or the other. And you're not just like in this class with like professional quilters, because I'm relatively new to quilting. Like I've sewn before, but I'm still kind of just experimenting. And it's been such an amazing place to learn and figure out what that version is for me. And sorry, this is a closer view of the quote, but it's just, I don't know, I've really enjoyed this class. And the quote then, the words, the quotes, the hoarding of quotes, the books have taken me into this like deep obsession with red work and just the experimentation. That's my cat Sargus. But of just how to place things and how to move things around. And like, I love the way Heidi talks about too. It's like, because to me, I don't know, I feel like quilts are such a gut instinct thing where I'm just like, do I like this? Do I not like this? And so it's kind of been interesting to have this class to be an examination of, why do I like this? Like not just going with your gut, but then like actually learning to talk about it and figure out why. And so then this is what I came to settle on. And I felt like it really needed those little bits of red and really needed the help of some more color. Like it was too just washed out. And so, yeah, I guess it's just, yeah, but it makes me so excited for what's to come, because if there's been this much in 9 months, like I can't even imagine like where this can keep going. And I really do feel, I know everybody says that like, oh, keep in touch, oh, we should hang out again, but this feels different. I will say it actually feels like a group I will continue to speak with. And I think there's some magic in that, of Heidi like kind of bringing together really wonderful people, because it just feels safe. Yeah, it feels really safe and really, really wonderful. More quotes I've hoarded. And then I just wanted to leave everyone with this Georgia O'Keeffe quote that I love. Been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, and I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing that I wanted to do. And you know, it's so important you do things outside your comfort zone, that we all do. And so my vote is just, if you're scared, do it scared. It will always be worth it. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. I love what you said, and I love your eloquence with words. And we were just recently doing our artist statement module and talking about how when you list your materials, when you have your quilts on exhibition, that you might include as one of the materials a quote from this person and a quote from that person. And you know, that the same way sometimes in my supply, in my materials and my media, I'll say a spell for this thing, or a spell just in general. And the hoarding of words and the full embracing of that, and just transcribing things exactly the way people speak. One of the things I love the most about that Mark Bradford quote is that he's finding his way through that sentence as Anderson Cooper was interviewing him on 60 Minutes. They talk about a high stress moment to come up with the right words. And it's just so beautiful in how you've transcribed it exactly as it is. And that encouragement to come as you are and to find joy in this process and not worry about if you're ready or not, but dive in is so appreciated. So we've got some time remaining. I'm so proud of us for clipping along. Everyone said exactly what you were meant to say in the exact amount of time you were meant to say it. What was it, Eleanor? Inevitable and surprising at the same time?
Yeah, surprising and
Yes, yes. So just huge applause to everyone for sharing. I just feel so proud of everyone in class that I could start crying to both this month and last month. I'm so proud of you and so excited by your work. And I'm a real attractor of good eggs, and there's such a wonderful group of people in class, and it's so exciting to get to introduce all of you to each other. So if we've got some questions, I know that Veronica popped a question in a while ago. If you would like to unmute and just share your question, you'd be very welcome to, Veronica, if you're still on, that you could maybe articulate it more fully if you unmute and share, but otherwise we can come back and find it. And then for other folks who would like to share an insight or an observation or ask a question, you're welcome to use that raise hand function. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom, there used to be an area with reactions, and then one of the possible reactions was to raise your hand, but they've changed it. And now there just is an option to raise your hand. So you can see that just to the left of the green, lime green share button. And then you would also be very welcome to pop something into the chat and we can respond to that. So, Veronica, are you here? Would you want to? As I'm scrolling back. Okay. So Veronica was asking, and just kind of generally asking anyone who would like to reply, if you could speak to how you see the relationships between improvisation and experimentation, working by hand, using unusual fabric scraps, and good workmanship. So if that question grabs anyone, you'd be welcome to respond. The relationships between improvisation and experimentation, working by hand, unusual fabrics, and good workmanship.
I mean, I would say one thing I've given some thought to is this idea of what constitutes good workmanship, and that it isn't necessarily making something look like it wasn't made by hand, or that it's perfect, and really trying to eliminate that idea of, I mean, I feel like there's a certain discourse about like the beauty of imperfection, but I find myself really pushing back against perfection as the bar. But instead, to me, I really love, I really want to see that things are made by a human, and I like the things that I made better if they are less, let's say, precise. And that I really like, I made that quilt with all the circles. I very purposefully cut the circles roughly and didn't sew them really precisely. But I did sew them meticulously with a lot of care. But the goal was not to make them perfect circles. And to me, that's sort of a technique intersection between hand sewing and sort of technique.
Thank you, Barbara. That's an awesome answer.
I could not agree more with what Barbara just said. So I'll address a different element of the question, which is working with unusual materials. I feel like that feels very related to experimentation. I love working with unusual materials. And that to me is sort of the basis for experimentation. I select unusual materials so that the material itself will guide the technique that I have to use to work with it. And that becomes the experimental aspect in the quilt. Like I have a quilt that I used faux fur in. The I don't know, whatever weird spandex nylon blend was in the underwear. The red velvet dress, that was a real opportunity to experiment with creating texture with hand quilting. So I think I really appreciate the many opportunities that an unusual material will give us for experimentation. So that feels like part of the fun and part of the journey.
Eleanor,
Oh,
oh, let me just add real quick
Sure.
about what Eleanor did, is that I just love that Eleanor has this incredible memory of this very specific dress. And at some point it was a hand-me-down or given away or lost or thrown in the garbage, and you didn't have it anymore. And I love that you didn't let that stop you from making a quilt out of your beloved red dress. Like not having that exact perfect one doesn't, oh, why did I throw, right? Because you'll become a hoarder if you think that way. If you hang on to every item you ever had because, oh my goodness, what if one day I want to make a quilt with it? And the fact that you were able to sub that out with a different red dress that was repurposed from the thrift store is to me so accepting of that improvisation that Veronica's asking about in that question, and repurposing, and that just kind of flowing like a river, right? That dress went to the next right person or next right place at that time. And then one very affordably fell into your lap at the right moment to make that quilt. And so there's just something really beautiful and inspiring about that, how you didn't let it stop you, how you found something else that let you make a piece about that. And then Aimee, you had a thought.
well, I was going to speak to improvisation. I think sometimes in the quilt world, especially in the modern quilt world, improvisation tends to sometimes mean random. And which is different than I feel like a lot of us, when we are thinking about, when we are using that term, I feel like a lot of the people in the class are really more thinking about just not so much pre-planning every moment, but letting the quilt grow as it needs to, the way that Eleanor's design process went, the way that I choose fabrics. There's still, and I like the choice that Barbara said of the word, like there's still there's care. And so there's care in the way we make, but also we're careful about what we're choosing to do, but it's not random. And so I like to think of improvisation more in terms of like, like a jazz performer, they're building off of something that's already happening around them, and they're continuing to move forward and playing off of that. And I feel like that is really the way that I see that word being used.
Thank you, Aimee. And I would add too that, the full title of the course is Quiltmaking, Aesthetics, Curiosity, Efficiency. And staying curious for me would be my top way of describing what does improvisation mean. That as I am making something, I continue to be curious about what it could and will ultimately become the whole time I'm making it, which is very different. It's very important observation that frequently improvisation can mean random, and that for a lot of us, that is a very different definition from what we find ourselves gravitating towards. So, oh, Barbara, you're on mute.
I was just I said this in the chat and then everyone chimed in. I think that one of the themes I've really enjoyed hearing today is trust. Trusting the process, trusting ourselves. And to me, that really is one of the things I think with that idea of staying curious that you're really trying to teach us, that if you stay curious, You know, the process will unfold. You'll figure out what to do.
Yeah, thank you. So I see that there's another question or comment in here. Rebecca has said, what new thing did you learn about yourself after taking this class? And anyone who feels inspired can answer that.
I think for me, it's how far can I push myself and not staying within the lines. Like I had to let go and being perfect. Nobody's perfect. And I know that in my head, but when I was piecing together that quilt, every little corner that didn't meet drove me crazy. And I'm like, I can't, this is why I can't do something from a pattern. So just being able to let go, I really think I've learned a lot about myself and how far I can push, and that there is no limit to someone's imagination and where things can go. And I have to trust the process. I stop and I look, and if I don't like it, I'll come back to it. And I don't think I would have done that. I would have just pushed through. And so it gets me more into a flow and into a more meditative process. And I also find hand stitching extremely meditative. I've actually fallen asleep on the couch hand stitching. I shouldn't do it at night. It's the problem because I'm working late. I think it's just pushing myself beyond what I thought I could do in the art world. It's just been amazing.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else have a response to that question from Rebecca?
I mean, I would just say related to that, like the less I plan and the less I try to sort of control what's going to happen, the better I like what I make. And the more it seems to connect with other people.
That's a beautiful one. Okay, and I don't see any other comments that look really specific as questions necessarily. Oh, Sarah, Heidi was asking if that was an oyster. So Sarah, would you want to answer that oyster question just verbally?
Oh yeah, I was messing around with, like, I'm thinking of the All Trails app. Like, also I'm like, raise your hand if you've been misled by the All Trails of what it says the trip is and it's not. But thinking about the contour lines, like I was messing around with layers of batting and trying to see if I could make it look like a mountain with the different contour lines of elevation. But it totally looks like an oyster though. Now that you say that, I'm like, I should do that again, but with that in my brain. So I love that.
I love that. It's either a trail or an oyster. Yeah, I see a lot of familiar faces. So if anyone wants to just like raise your hand and say hi. In my view, I can currently see Cal with your beautiful background and your view, you're waving. If you wanted to wave and say hi, you'd be so welcome. Or yeah, there's several other people who've been, oh, I'm sorry, can you please, I thought the door was locked. I don't know how you were able to open it. If you can, thank you. No, I'm teaching on Zoom. Sorry, I'm here in my artist residency at the Pfister. Yeah, if anyone, oh, I see Ben's raised his hand. Ben, join us.
Hi, I've was struck just hearing everybody talk about how you are more improv. You don't use blocks, and I just think that I don't have a question. The comment is, I appreciate that you all signed up at the same time for the same day to talk about this, because I think it is you all really played off of each other, and like I think the collection of you all is a really good reflection of the class in general, of how improv focused most of the participants in the class are. And so yeah, it's just a reflection that I think it's great that you all happen to all come together on the same day, because it really worked well to talk about the class and trusting the process and the various other comments that have come up. So thank you for signing up today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they were, I don't know, I heard more of a reflection about random choice, like chaos, like choosing things at random as opposed to blocks specifically. But yeah, it's been wonderful to see, Ben, some of your work as creating that improvisation with blocks, and just especially if you got to see Ben's presentation previously, the variety that exists within the class is so exciting to see, and that there aren't hard and fast rules at all about what you should be making or how fast you should be making things or your style or your approach, that there's a real bigness in class that exists. I see a hand raised from Megan, so I'm gonna spotlight you and you can unmute, and I'm so excited to have you share.
I'm curious about how you guys think about whether you're being successful in your art practice. Because I don't want to be negative, but I don't think many of these would get accepted to the Modern Quilt Guild show. Maybe they would, but like they're not really Modern Quilt Guild sort of show things. So like, are you trying to get into galleries, or is that just not the point? I'm curious about like how you know you're doing what you want to do. Is it just a trust process?
I mean, I would say just my own answer is it still shocks the shit out of me that any of my quilts have been accepted to the Modern Quilt Guild, much less won awards and been invited to teach there for years.
Right.
So I like the idea of leaning into make what it's in your heart to make and then see where it fits. And if enough people keep submitting and applying with quilts, that look like they're maybe made in a class with me instead of a more, we talk a fair amount about the page on the Modern Quilt Guild's website that describes what a modern quilt is, and just the examples of those quilts, and then the disconnect between the quilts that have won awards year after year after year. I see a very different aesthetic between that descriptive page and then the quilts that are winning awards and the quilts that I see every year. So I think that it's a living organization that breathes and has different trends each year, and things come and go. And so
Well,
let's
asking about the Modern Quilt Guild and more asking about like, how are you judging whether you're doing what you want to do, and then how are you getting your work out there? So you maybe you all are going to be in the Modern Quilt Guild, and I know that Aimee and Barbara like created a shadow Modern Quilt Guild show in Raleigh last year. So do you like, is showing your stuff something that's important to you, or is it what are you doing with all this stuff at the end of your process?
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Eleanor, if you want to go first. Okay, I was just going to say that I'll be really honest that a couple years ago, when I first started doing this, I was in therapy, and my therapist kept saying, when are you going to figure out when are you going to decide that you're successful? What is that going to look like? What does it mean to be an artist to you? How are you going to feel comfortable saying that? And and then she listed things, and I realized that, and I'm continuing to work on this. I mean, I'm working on it a lot in this class, which is the piece about trust, which is that mostly what I'm doing is right now making what I want to do is make things that feel right to me. And I do hope that they find a place but it's not, but the ultimate goal isn't to show. The ultimate goal is to make the art. There's this great artist that I love called Aldwith, and I saw a show of hers in Raleigh a few years ago, and she just is like, the work is the work. That's it. And I really, really believe that. And so, yeah, so I think that it doesn't mean that we can't think about it. I feel like this class has been not just about like what we're going to make, but like how we're going to talk about it, how we're going to present our work, how we're going to write about our work, how we're going to photograph our work. What we have talked about the different quilt guilds from like internationally, like, and what they look like. Where could our quilts go? Let's look at those different organizations. I feel like it's been a place for this particular class has been so much more than just about quilt making. I really feel like it's about, if you want it to be, it can be a place where you could learn what it could mean for what your artistic practice is, which could include finding the spaces that make sense for you. If that, I'm hoping that helps. That's where I'm at. So
Thank you.
yeah.
And I'll just echo what Aimee said and say that this class also really feels like a place for community. And I find that just being part of a community of quilt makers and sewists and artists feels like the goal for me right now. I mean, for me personally, because I'm so new to quilting, all of my goals are around just trusting my creative sensibility and learning new techniques and sort of following that journey and making stuff. And doing things like this, like presenting our work in this space as a community, feels like I can't imagine a better way to sort of feel like this is what I'm making it for. So I can sit with people and talk about it together and hear about what they're making. So that for me is the goal, is to have this community.
One thing that struck me too, that in talking about like the successful and the metrics and how you decide, it's like, because I think there's always this ongoing question of like, when is it done? And I was thinking about this with finding that gosh, Julia Scott, I think is her name. Maybe I'm yes, but like I'm mixing up Julia Cameron because I want to talk about her too, and Judith Scott, that's what it is. Judith Scott, who like, and I was listening to the podcast The Great Women Artists, and they were talking about a conservator that had worked with her, and just how they talked about she always knew when she was done. And so that's been an interesting idea to kind of like turn over in my head of like, how do you know when you're done? Like, because quilts, you could conceivably go on forever. Like some of them do. And then it's also, I think, the kind of twofold of like trusting your gut. And the way I see this class is like, it's less about, because I am honestly like, am I just going to make quilts forever? Like there's a stack of them. I live in a studio apartment. What am I doing here? But I think of it like the way Julia Cameron talks about in The Artist's Way, where she talks about the morning pages. And it's that exercise to write just 3 pages of anything in the morning, to just like let the stopper out and like get your creative juices flowing and get the kind of like bullshit out of the way so you can actually make the good stuff you're meant to make. And so I think that's what I see a lot of this class is too. It's not that every thing I make will be successful in my eyes, because like we all know the gap, and I think Silvia talked about that too, of like where you're like, this is what I wanted to make in my head and this is the thing that came out, and it's completely not at all what I was trying to do here. But it's like this class is the kind of like opening stopper to the bottle to like get you going, because then you can actually get to the point of what you are probably really trying to make. But you need the like, I find just the doing it, the repetitive action, the constant like trying something out, experimentation is what like clears the way. Because a lot of the things I've made, I'm like, this is not it. This is not, I don't need to show this to anyone, but I needed to make it to like get it out so I could make the thing I really wanted to make. So that's how I see it. But I love that question. I think that's such a like important thing to talk about, because it is like, how do you define success, or like what are those to you?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry I brought in the Modern Quilt Guild. I'm not implying anything by saying that. I just,
It comes up a lot in our conversations. I mean, I think it's such a good question because it makes me realize that I think that's actually something I'm really, I wouldn't say wrestling with, but like that's something I'm trying to figure out. Like, how do I know if I feel like a piece is successful? And I feel like most of my clues now are not about even about the product, much less about like if it gets shown outside my basement studio, but more about how what the process is like, because I feel like I'm starting to recognize what the process of making feels like when I'm really in the zone and making the stuff that I feel really driven to make.
mhm.
And that all of this is new enough to me that that's a new thing that I'm still kind of figuring out. And so it's almost like I haven't even gotten to the point of thinking about what the successful product and its fate even looks like.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Megan, thank you so much for sharing your question and asking it live. Really adds to the richness of the conversation.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Focus on you, Heidi,
Mhm.
teaching people to do small things first. Like, is that something that you recommend people do to test out ideas?
That definitely is in the mix. You know, one of the, I learned to teach in a variety of places. I studied art education at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I was a high school art teacher for 9 years. And around year 6 or 7, I did my yoga teacher training with Rolf Gates. And it was just such an aha moment of a different approach to teaching when we weren't trying to be certified by the state of Illinois to be teachers. And so he would repeat to us all the time, we want our students to feel successful. And he would do like 2 thumbs up when he said that. And we would all do 2 thumbs up with our bodies back to him. And that idea of how do I allow a student to start out feeling successful, and like once you have a success or two, they build on each other. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I'm making something and I'm going to expect to feel successful afterwards. And that's a big part of that process of building trust in yourself that you can do things. So one way of doing that is working small. And I think we've seen some really lovely examples, especially today with Aimee and Karen sharing about working small. But other times, successful feels like tackling that big quilt that you didn't have the courage to try before. And like, what if I made a bigger quilt? And there's, you know, just so much joy to be found in that as well. So I don't try to push scale so much as the class begins very strongly with share an introduction of who you are, and then aesthetics, and then conceptual interests. And I think if first, it can be so easy to have an experience of a disconnect between the work that you're making and the work that you walk into a room of 100 quilts and which are the top 10 that catch your eye. And you can sort of step back and realize, if my quilt was in a show of 100, it would not be among the 10 that caught my eye. I'm not making things that are my aesthetic. It was a real important moment for me, just in realizing that I was doing these very precise embroideries back in 2011. And they were so careful and so tight. And then I went to the art museum and I like loved all the drip paintings and the wabi sabi slumpy things and the falling apart stuff. And I was like, huh, what's going on here that I'm not making things I'm naturally drawn to? And how can I revisit that? And so, you know, for example, that image that Silvia had of the graffiti and then pointing out those 4 little moments where something was happening that she was having like that visceral body reaction to, oh, I love that. We talk a lot in class about mindfulness and how can you go to an art exhibition and watch yourself watching the art, and can you notice those things that draw you in and make you excited, and not stop at just, oh, I must like Mark Bradford, but actually, what is it that I like about what Mark Bradford's doing? Because he's doing 100 things, and it's probably, again, 10% of those things that he's doing that I love. And I can incorporate those things into my work and make something that will never be mistaken for a Mark Bradford. It really frees me up from feeling like, oh, but what if I'm copying too much and appropriating, or, that it's usually little enough, the thing that you love, that you can add that into your work and then kind of take it as part of yourself. And certainly credit, if you've got an artist that you love that inspires you the way that Mark's work inspires me. I try to not be shy about sharing that. Same as like Deb Sokolow, who came up. I just adore her work and her sense of humor, and bringing that in is exciting. But I find that to be a surer route to feeling successful and having those first things that you make feel great, to create that tumbleweed effect, rather than specifically focusing on scale.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else want to join us? All right, well, we're a little over 2 hours, so thank you to those who are hanging in and staying tight with us. I will say thank you so much for joining. And if you are interested in the course, there's an early notification link that is currently on my website. So if you go to HeidiParkes.com and the blog tab, that will link to that early notification link, as will the workshops tab that's linking as well to when quilt making is going to begin for 2025. And so that'll be a wonderful way to be able to sign up a little bit early. Make sure, I forget who was saying that you really wanted to get the Sunday spot, and that's what pushed you to sign up when you did. But that'll help you get the day of the week that you want. I have recently made a shift. Before, I was going to do a Friday evening class to accommodate some of the people on the pre-registration list who were in Australia who were saying that they wanted to join, but the pre-registration list has access to signing up, and nobody signed up for Friday. So I am reclaiming date night for me and Bo. And so instead of having a Friday evening option, there'll be a Mondays at 2 p.m. option instead. So the course is going to run Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday in 2025. And my last call to action would be, if you enjoyed the work of these 6 incredible makers, all of their Instagrams are linked both in the YouTube recording. Hopefully you'll like and subscribe if you're joining that way. And they're also linked on that blog post that brought you to the Zoom room. And part of class is that I do one-on-one pairings for students throughout the year. So every month they get a one-on-one pairing to have a conversation with someone, and they're deep in the feeling of how rich those conversations can be. So I bet if you drop into their DMs on Instagram and say, hey, I love your work, would you be willing to have a one-on-one Zoom with me? I bet odds are good that these people will say yes to you. So don't be shy. I think Zach Foster and I are pretty famously friends, and we became friends because he dropped into my DMs and just said, hey. So, don't be shy about that. It's a lot of fun, and I bet that you would get a great response if you reached out to talk to any of these 6, and certainly anyone who's in the course this year. Thank you, everyone.